So just to introduce ourselves, my name's Sarah Arnold, and I'm in my second year in the Chemical and Biomedical Engineering program.
I'm Chio Ayachi. I'm in my second year of the chemical and bioengineering program. Sound very similar, not the same thing though.
No, not the same program, but both wonderful programs though that we're pretty passionate about. So we're two representatives from MacSER, and we'll be giving you a brief presentation today. So just a little overview. So the first probably 10 to 20 minutes, we're not quite sure about timing. We'll be talking about just networking tips and tricks and how you can kind of approach trying to find a research position if that's something that you're interested in. We then have some wonderful student researchers here who are going to talk about their experience, how they approached research and got a position in a lab, some of the funding options they used, and then afterwards they'll be here to answer your questions. So this may go up till 7, it may go a bit shorter, it all kind of just depends on how many questions and such you want to ask them. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are from MacSER. So if you haven't heard of us before, that's okay. I'm going to tell you who we are. So we are the McMaster Society for Engineering Research, and we are a group of undergraduate students in the Faculty of Engineering. And we kind of have these main goals that are outlined here. So we try and build a stronger community amongst all of the undergraduate researchers. And we really aim to support summer researchers, specifically undergrads, and to help increase awareness of the different research opportunities that we have, such as holding events like this. We have our research fair coming up at the end of November, so please keep an eye out on social media for that. We really try and educate students on funding opportunities. We have our YouTube channel, which contains videos from past events. And overall, we really want to provide you with opportunities for professional development and hopefully help get a good foot in the door for different research possibilities. So you can always reach out to us on social media if you want more information. Okay, so we are now going to talk about a bit about how you can get involved in research, because you've probably heard of it, you've probably heard upper years talking about it, professors talking about it, and if you're here, I'm hoping that's something you're pretty excited about and interested in doing. However, you may still not quite know how you could have that unfold for you. So we're going to hopefully help you out a little bit tonight. Okay, so one of the first things that you're going to want to do is really narrow in on what you want to focus on for your research. And we call these at McMaster research clusters. If you haven't heard of this before, that's completely okay. I most certainly had not until I started looking into finding a research position. So if we go to the next slide, I believe we have these all outlined here. So these can be found on the McMaster Engineering website if you go under the research tab. So essentially all of the research and professors are they pick these main focuses for their research to focus on. So we have these 8 clusters here. So there's advanced manufacturing, digital and smart systems, energy, environment, health and bioinnovation, infrastructure, micro nanosystems, and transportation. And some of these you may have a clear picture in your head of what it could look like. Some of them you may be like, wait, what is this? What does that mean? That's perfectly okay. The best way to learn about them is to kind of click on them and just read more about the research that's being done. So the main goal with looking at these is you can kind of figure out what are you most interested in. So for me personally, it was health and bioinnovation. I love, as a biomedical engineering student, I loved that side of things and wanting to look more into that. But I have friends who were most interested in energy, and that's what they focused looking at when trying to figure out who they may want to research with. So it's really cool because you kind of get to narrow in on the focus of what kind of projects you will most want to do. So once you've picked your research cluster, the next thing you're going to want to do is learn more about the professors that do research in that area and how the types of projects they do, how much you're interested in them. So to do this, once you've kind of selected on a research cluster, you can go to what we call the related faculty section of the web page. And I apologize for the blurry picture here, but when you go to related faculty, you can see all the different researchers that currently have work under that research cluster. Now, the great thing with this is opposed to sorting by the department. So for example, you can also look at the faculty that's in the Department of Chemical Engineering, the Department of Materials Engineering. But what's nice with this is with these research clusters, you can see them separate from the department. So you can look at professors who are from a whole wide range of departments, who are from a whole wide range of departments, but with a similar research focus. Because I know people who have done research in their department, but have also done research in another department, and both can be great experiences. And you can really take away stuff from both situations. Now, I know you're all still in year one, and you may not know what stream you want to do, and that is 100% completely okay. You don't necessarily need to do research in the department that you're hoping to be a part of. You can certainly do that, but you don't have to. So please just don't let that stress you out too much. So once you've really decided upon the research professors you're most interested in, you will want to start contacting faculty members. And so personally, I think when I started reaching out to professors, I had a list of like 5 faculty members that I started with. So you're not just going to want to put all your eggs in one basket. You're going to want to have a few different options that you think are most interesting to you. So emailing faculty is a scary thing. I know it is. I know it can be really intimidating and you're not quite sure how to do it. And it can be really nerve-wracking putting yourself out there on that level. So we're just kind of gonna give you a little template here of what I know I personally used, and I believe a few other researchers here did as well. So this email template here, I'm sure you may have seen this in different presentations given out by different people or academic counselors and such. It is a really good approach to take. So just to walk you through some of the stuff here, you're obviously going to want to start with a nice introduction, just the hello, and address them by their title. Do not just call them by their first name. Please don't do that. That won't go over well. Give them the respect that they deserve and approach it in a nice, respectful way. The first paragraph is very good to do an introduction about yourself, your program, what your research interests are, and what interests you about that professor's research. So this part is very important here. Do not just look at like the overview of your professor that you're contacting and be like, oh, I guess this looks cool. Go that extra mile to read some of their papers, look at some of the research they've done, like look at the lab website and the projects that they highlight there. Because professors really love to see that you've taken the initiative to look at their work and that you've identified what about their work you're most interested in. So if you just email them something very generic and just be like, I would like to work with you, that's great. And I'm sure they'd be interested. But if you really make a comment to them saying, I've looked into this project, I'm really fascinated in how you do A, B, and C by doing these 2 things and such. I hope the point's coming across here. Don't just generally look at them and be like, this is good. Really, really dive deep into the research that they've been doing so that you can kind of have a conversation with them almost. And yeah, sorry, I trailed off a little there, but that's the overall goal there. Then in the second paragraph, you really want to back over. Thanks. In the second paragraph, you want to outline what makes you a good candidate for this position. So you will typically include your resume when you're emailing a professor. You want to have a nice, neat resume, and we will be talking about that later. Essentially, how I see it and how many people approach it is this email is sort of like your cover letter, you could say. I know some people who've attached cover letters with emails to professors, but usually if you have an email like this with the resume, that will kind of cover your, that'll have you covered there. But I know different people have done different things. So you can, yeah. But pretty much the second paragraph's where you highlight the key things from your resume that make you an ideal candidate. And as we'll see in the next slide in a second, bullet points can be used for this. I personally did it in paragraph form. It's kind of a personal choice. Then in your third paragraph, you can really express the desire to want to meet with them further. You can ask if they would be interested and have time to set up a meeting to talk more about different possibilities. And then you can thank the professor for their time. So we'll just go to the next slide here, which has just a brief example. So you can look over this, kind of read it. It has that introduction. It says how they've attached the resume and has summarized some of their skills there. And then at the bottom here, I want to point out how they mention discuss any paid or volunteer research opportunities you may have. So what's key about this is not all professors will be able to have funding for you just out of their lab pocket. That's sometimes very hard to come by. A lot of the time, professors will try and seek out funding with you. Or if you really, really want a research experience and say you want to volunteer once a week maybe, and you're not super concerned about getting money for it, but you really want the experience, then sometimes volunteering in a lab can be a great, wonderful experience. That's actually how my first volunteer experience came up a few years ago. It was just as a volunteer position, but I learned so much from it, and I'm very grateful for that experience. So that's something to keep in mind. If obviously not everyone's able to do that, and if you are looking to have this as a co-op or as a job, then you will probably want some financial compensation for it. But please keep that in mind, because that's a great way to get started as well. So anyway, now I will pass it off to Sheil, who will talk a bit more about funding and how to do a great resume.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So once you've sent off this email, obviously the next question is, what happens to this email? Are they going to ghost me? Well, there's a couple of responses that you might anticipate. Depending on when you send it, depending on how proactive the professors are, sometimes they'll already have hired research assistants for next summers. Sometimes they'll say you can contact me next year. That's to be expected. Obviously, it's not an easy thing to secure a research position, especially those that don't come with funding. It's not impossible by any means, but you might expect follow up with me later, some no responses, which is totally reasonable. Professors are very busy people. Sometimes they don't have the time to filter through a bunch of lab emails. Sometimes they will ask you and inquire about funding. Do you have any research grants, scholarships? Are you planning on applying for MacSER? These types of questions, which we'll talk a little bit more later. Do you qualify for a work study? We talk about that a little bit more later too. So hold on and we'll discuss those two avenues of funding. And then sometimes they would want to meet with you, go through an interview process. Sometimes it's formal, sometimes it's informal, but there's a couple different avenues that professors might pursue once they've gotten your email. So we'll talk a little bit about funding now. There's some students who receive funding straight out of high school in their first years, undergraduate research funding. Sometimes it's through the NSERC funding. That's probably one of the most common types of funding at McMaster University. To apply for this type of funding, you need a GPA of 10 or higher. You would receive, I think this number is a bit wrong. I think it might be $6,000 now, but you can just check the NSERC website. All this information is really easy to find there. And then obviously there's a link there too. So typically you'll contact a professor and apply for funding with them to work in their lab. And if you get that funding, then you get a position as well. So now we'll talk a little bit more about networking and some tips, which is kind of the latter half of this. So obviously, as Sarah mentioned, alongside with the email you send, it's a really good idea to attach maybe transcripts, but what's probably most important is your resume. So some of this you guys probably already know, but resumes are best short, succinct. You'd want to include a header with your name, a LinkedIn URL. LinkedIn URLs are decently important now. Most people have LinkedIn. Most professors will take a look at your LinkedIn too if they're looking at your resume. It's just how it is nowadays. Highlights of qualifications is a good section to have just at the top. So if a professor is skimming your resume and doesn't have time to read everything, they can kind of get why you might be a good fit for the lab. If you're a first year, you would want to specify which program you're in and which stream you intend on pursuing. You might not know if you will pursue that stream later on, but it's kind of good to give them an idea of which discipline you might fall into. Then you can talk about some of your projects, extracurriculars, work experience, volunteer experiences. Even if these aren't directly related to STEM, directly related to research, they're good to have and good to show kind of transferable skills and knowledge that you've done in the past, either independently or in groups. You're going to want to talk about your skills, software skills. You can include things you're learning in 1P10, 1P13, laboratory and safety skills, any languages you have, awards and achievements. So these are all pretty standard things, just conveying why you would be a good researcher for a specific lab. Then the flip side of this coin is also your LinkedIn. We mentioned that a little bit. LinkedIn's are becoming more and more common. I remember when I first met with my professor to interview me, he just upfront admitted to stalking my LinkedIn before we had this interview. So it's something that you want to keep decently up to date, especially when you're applying for research positions. Unlike a resume, which has to be succinct, we kind of encourage you to put as much as is appropriate and relevant on your LinkedIn. It doesn't need to be condensed to only recent experiences like a resume. It can have older experiences. And it's good to kind of use all the functionalities of LinkedIn, reaching out to people you know, connecting with peers, adding your skills. It just gives a fuller profile and shows that you're actually actively invested in pursuing a position, pursuing one of these jobs. So you can add media, you can add links to your sections under work experience, volunteer experiences. Once again, brevity and highlighting what's most important is a good thing to do on LinkedIn too. So we have this kind of joke, a little LinkedIn heading that you can include. So instead of just saying engineering 1 student, you could include a couple little things about you: assistant to the regional manager at Dunder Mifflin, passionate about agricultural innovation, adding a couple of your interests, your skills, your current positions. It shows kind of a succinct way that the professor can kind of gauge what you're looking for. It's also a good idea to have a professional profile picture and a background image. Not probably the time for an Instagram profile picture or something of that nature. It's obviously a networking platform where presenting your best self to a professor is a good idea. So if you have more questions about LinkedIn, if you're not 100% sure about appointment with ECCS and have your LinkedIn profile critiqued, it comes with your tuition. It's something you can sign up for whenever. So it's good to take advantage of it, especially before you start applying for co-ops and research positions. You can have your LinkedIn, your resume critiqued, and you can just go into appointments, book an appointment by type, and then book one of these appointments with someone at ECCS, and they'll get you set up and give you really personalized feedback for your LinkedIn. I think a lot of us who have gotten research positions has had our resumes and LinkedIn critiques, and they bring up a lot of things that you probably wouldn't have thought about. And they also get a chance to look at your individual resume, which isn't something people always get to do. So with that, we hope to have covered a little bit about research, networking, and we will have a Q&A section. We did receive a decent number of questions beforehand that we'll go over, but we will I will pass the floor off to our student testimonials right now. I think the order has changed a little bit. It'll be Alex first, then Jane, then Maddie. Okay, so Alex, the floor is yours. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm in my 4th year of chemical engineering and iBiomed. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how I found my research position from this past summer. So this past summer, I worked with Dr. LaTulip, who's a professor in the chemical engineering department. So yeah, I'll just, I guess, start from the beginning. So I started looking for research positions probably around late November, early December. Around that time, I was a bit lucky because I personally knew Dr. LaTulip from a class I had taken with him. But if you don't know any professor personally because you're in 1st year and they're in a different department, like, don't worry about that. It's just how it worked out for me. So essentially, what you will probably have to do is like cold email professors, like the email template Sarah showed. So that's kind of what I did. And essentially he replied back and we set up a face-to-face call because it was peak pandemic. And we discussed like the work his lab is doing and the projects his grad students are working on. And I was like, okay, I'm very interested in the work you guys are doing. And from there, we discussed like me applying for NSERC to get funding, which will probably happen for a lot of you if you don't already have like the 1st year funding scholarship or any other funding available. NSERCs due either late January or early February. Or usually the departments will send out emails about NSERC and NSERC deadlines. I heard back around mid-March confirming that I got NSERC funding, which, whew. But also if you don't get NSERC funding, definitely talk to professors about other scholarships available, because I know there are some people, even from the summer, like this past summer, who got funding from external, I guess, companies, not-for-profits, like other research organizations that your professor might have contacts in or might like have like qualify for like the certain type of like research interest that the company does. So for example, like if the company is interested in cancer research and your professor is doing things in cancer research, like you would probably qualify to apply for that scholarship. I guess the best tip I would give when trying to cold email professors would be to definitely let them know if there's a certain area or project that their lab is currently working on that interests you. Just because once you find a research or a professor that would like to have you work in their lab, they will typically pair you with a graduate student that's working in a certain area. So if you express interest in one area, usually the professor will try their best to like have you work with a grad student that's working in that area, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's typically the layout I've found from my own experience and from my friends' experience, that as an undergrad, you come in, you're essentially given a project that a grad student is working on, and you assist them and you report to them. So this summer, I personally worked with 2 different grad students on 2 different projects. and they were both in the downstream processing of therapeutic viruses, which if you're not in chem eng, it's a very chem eng like separations type thing. So a lot of filtering. And I found it actually involved a lot of my chemical engineering knowledge from like separations classes, as well as a lot of general chemistry knowledge and general biology knowledge. In terms of the work I did this summer, there was a lot of literature searches, get ready to read like a lot of papers. I did a lot of bench lab work, so making buffers, mixing stuff up, pipetting. I also got a chance to work in a biosafety cabinet, which for those of you who don't know, it's like a fume hood, but fancier when you're working with not dangerous is a bad word, but certain classifications of biological agents need certain safety measures. And with that, I also got a chance to learn about cell cultures and doing like actually culturing bacteria. And I also did a little bit of data analysis in Excel. I worked a bit with MATLAB and as well with Autodesk Inventor, which maybe you wouldn't expect to need during lab work, but it comes up and things from your classes end up being super useful in the lab. So yeah, overall, it was a really great summer. I had a really good experience doing research. And I hope it all works out for those of you who are wanting to do research this coming summer. Yeah, that's all for me.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
Sorry, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, so just remember, we are doing a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to jot them down now. Unless, again, Alex, if you need to go, no worries at all there. Okay,
I'm good. I'll be around.
Great.
Okay, so Jane, do you want to take it away and talk about your experience, which was a little bit different from Alex's?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Jane and I'm in second year software. My research background was that I was lucky to be one of the scholarship winners, and it for sure helped with securing a position, but it's also not a necessity. There are plenty of people who do it without a scholarship or without MacSER funding. So I mentioned that I'm in software, and I knew last year when I was in Eng 1 that I wanted to go into software. So I started off by looking for research in the software department, but through looking at the research clusters, I ended up in a position that was in the ECE department. So I highly recommend looking at research clusters and going across departments because there are a lot more options there. So look both by faculty, but also the research clusters, and it gave me some more knowledge and it makes me more well-rounded. So when it came to emailing professors, after I made a list and I found which labs and projects I was interested in, I sent out a lot of emails. It took until like the third round of emailing for me to actually get an interview. Before that, I either got no's or just no response. And it's not personal at all. It's important to remember not to get discouraged because it's not personal. Professors are very busy and they get a lot of emails. And ultimately, what my research consisted of was working on MATLAB with machine learning to detect sleep apnea. So it was kind of like a biomedical computer engineering project. It was extremely interesting. I got to look at accelerometer data and then do data analysis, and machine learning is like a big word. It was definitely beyond the scope of my knowledge. I didn't really know anything about it. And to prepare for my research, I had to do a Coursera course ahead of time. And even starting it, I wasn't confident in my abilities, but the professors that I worked with were very helpful in answering all my questions, and little by little it made more sense, and it's something that I really like now and want to keep doing in the future. The structure of my research was maybe a little different from, for example, Alex, who you just heard from, because I didn't work with a grad student. I worked with A, the professor that I emailed, and then B, another professor who he worked with very closely. Their names are Dr. Sharani and Dr. Riley. Dr. Riley's semi-retired, so he had more time to help out. And they were super nice, super helpful. It was completely online, which had its pros such that it was convenient. I could choose my own working hours. I didn't have to commute anywhere. But it also wasn't very hands-on, and like sometimes it didn't feel very immersive. But we had like weekly meetings and they were always available by email, and we could always like plan a meeting in the middle of the week if need be. So, and then they also connected me with a medical student who they knew, who also helped explain like concepts to me. So that was extremely helpful too. And yeah, overall, it was a really great experience. I had a great summer. I really enjoyed that, like during the time that I didn't have school, I can still like exercise my brain, but it was low stakes in terms of like, it didn't affect my GPA. I didn't have like the stress of exams, and it was just learning for the pure joy of it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jane. Very nice and a very interesting experience too. Last but not least is Maddie. If Maddie was having, oh, she's there.
Yes,
Awesome.
I'm back. So hi guys, my name is Maddie and I am a second year materials and biomedical engineering student. And last summer I had the opportunity to do research with the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. Just like Jane, I was a recipient of the first year summer like engineering scholarship, which definitely helped in securing a position. So I had to go through the email of the process of emailing various profs after making a list, writing down what I liked best about different areas of research. And then, so yeah, basically after that, I just reached out with this email template. And obviously you have to try to customize it to who you're emailing so they know that you're genuinely interested in their research. Because again, just like a cover letter, you can't just have the same cover letter for every job you apply to. I think you really have to make a personal connection, I guess, with why you want to do the research and stuff like that. So after emailing a couple profs, either not getting a response or just not like them saying, oh, sorry, I don't have any room in my lab, different things like that, I finally had an interview with Dr. Howlatter. And my summer research basically consisted of electrochemical sensing for biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease. So even though I did research in a different department than what I'm studying now, there's so many different ways that everything connects. So even though I was using a lot of electrical eng principles, I still got to apply some of the materials knowledge that I am learning right now, which was kind of neat to see that come into play, especially as I started seeing things come up in lectures. I kind of recognized that from my summer research. I guess that was pretty neat, and I had the opportunity to write a paper, which I am still kind of working on to get published. So yeah, that was basically my experience. And I guess I could say one piece of advice is if you do get into research, try not to feel overwhelmed, even when you're looking into different areas. If you don't fully understand necessarily what the little details of the research are, because I could honestly tell you, I had no idea really a lot about electrochemical sensing. So going in, my prof was really kind and paired me up with a couple of his grad students. So they kind of just walk you through the process. So I would say don't let that turn you away from a certain area of research, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maddie. Thank you all. So we have a couple of questions that some of you guys filled in the form for registration. But if you guys have any questions for any of the speakers, you can just drop them in the chat right now. I'll probably give you like 30 seconds, a minute to do that. If not, we'll start with a couple of pre-prepared questions for the researchers. So yeah.
And then pretty much, so we have 3 wonderful speakers here. All of them have had great experiences. So now is really a great time. We also have a small group of people here. So this is great because you can really get a chance to ask questions you may not get to otherwise. So yeah, and then Sheila and I have also done research in the past. So if there's anything you want to ask us, we can do that too. So we'll just wait a second and then get to the questions. Here, Sheila, can I start with the one that's in the chat and then we could get to the prepared ones? Okay. So someone asks, when is the deadline to apply for the scholarship for research, please? Thank you so much for, you're welcome. It's nice to be able to share this stuff with you all. So there's a few, the big thing to know is there are a bunch of different potential research scholarships out there. So I know the one Alex had, MCER, that is, as she said, late January, early February. There are also, it's not just that. Like I know a lot of people, like NSERC is a big one, and it's very like, again, I always am like, congrats, Alex, like that's amazing. But there are other stuff out there. It's not just like you have to get that or you can't get any. So I'm actually with my professor, there's been others I've been looking at for next summer. They're usually do come early months of next year. So January, February, that's really when you'll want to look at that and such. Sorry, you'll want to look into it sooner, but that's when they'll most likely be due. So often once there's a professor who's pretty interested in meeting with you and such, they can kind of mention to you, this is something I think you should apply for, and then they can kind of help you along with that process potentially. Sorry, and just to follow up with Alexander's question, yes. So if you already have funding that you have secured, absolutely mention that in your email. That will, if you have something already, that will increase your chances of getting a response. So definitely do that. And just if you have a value already, include that value as well and be like, I have so-and-so scholarship valued at this much to help me with a position. So that will just kind of help them be like, oh, they already have something coming in. That's kind of less work for them on the getting funding side.
Okay, so if those are the questions that you guys have, we can talk about a little bit of the questions here. I think the most recurring question is what abilities, what skills are professors looking for to hire? So do any of you guys want to take that question? What skills are people looking for, professors looking for when they hire researchers?
I can start, maybe, I don't know if everyone wants to comment in on this, but it's definitely, I would say it's definitely more soft skills. I would say a professor cares a lot about if you're going to work hard and fit into the lab, because chances are, especially if you're in first year or you're going across departments, you're not going to know how to do a lot of the techniques and like a lot of like specific lab techniques. Like you'll have to learn, and like anyone coming into the lab would have to learn. So as long as you can show that you're excited about the research and work hard, and I think like when you meet with the professor that you're like a good fit for the lab, I think that's very important. And that's what they look for a lot more than you already know how to do like 50 different like lab skills. Like that's teachable.
I definitely agree. And to add on top of that, yeah, like show your different soft skills and make sure your resume shows how versatile you are. Like have a variety of different ventures, both academic and non-academic, and it'll show that you can adapt and be good in different roles.
I'm just going to hop off there. I had not pipetted before this summer, which is such a bizarre thought. I worked with Alex on one of the projects there, and that was like, I had barely any of like the hands-on lab experience that I ended up being trained on, but they didn't care about that at all. It was much more like that I was eager to learn, that I was interested in the project I was doing. And yeah, as Jane said, highlight on your resume like the strong variety of stuff you have, and then also do sell yourself for the skills that you do have. So for example, we did end up working with Autodesk Inventor, so they were happy to know that like, oh yeah, you already learned that back in first year. Like that's something that you don't have to teach you there. So highlight the skills you have, but definitely soft skills overall. That's what's gonna, a lot of the other stuff that can be taught essentially. So really having that eagerness and the flexibility is really
good. Okay, I think those were very good answers, kind of cover that question. There's a couple that just have like decently straight answers. I think we covered a couple of these. How do you secure a research position during the school year? How do we go about writing emails to researchers, especially at Mac? How do we display our past research work and skills on a resume? Would research completed during coursework be useful to mention? So for that one, anything that you consider relevant to your resume is something that you can definitely include. Class projects you do in 1P10 and 1P13. If you want to include those on your LinkedIn, you can go ahead. If they taught some skills, then include the skills there. Do you guys have anything to add for those questions? I know I kind of rattled them off decently quickly.
Can you repeat the one before that, please?
How do we display our past research work and skills on a resume?
Yeah, so I think you said projects is a good way to do that, right?
Yeah. And then, yeah, a couple, how can I get a first year research opportunity during the first year of university? It's kind of our goal here in the presentation, so I hope we cover that one. So no, I think we hit all of the pre-questions we have. And if you guys don't have too many other questions, then I guess this is the last call out for anyone still in this call. Do you guys have any questions? All our researchers are more than happy to answer it for you.
We'll give you a minute. We'll give you a
Yeah.
minute. Yeah. And I mentioned this at the beginning, but the MacSER will be hosting their research fair at the end of November. This is actually where I met my professor that I ended up working with. So it's a great event to kind of come out. It's where professors come or they send their grad students to come and like essentially show the work they've been doing and see if anyone's interested and if there's anyone who everyone's excited for working with. So keep an eye out on our social medias to sign up for that.
We have a question for summer research positions. Is it usually in person or online? So during the summer of COVID, I'm pretty sure this was summer 2020, everything was decently online. This summer, a lot of people had kind of mixed models. Some people, like Jane, had mainly online things. A lot of people had fully in-person things or a couple of meetings here and there that would be online, but they went into the lab a lot. Obviously, with like COVID precautions and all that. For next year, assuming everything on campus is back up and running in winter term, I'd assume that the majority of research positions would return to normal, to pre-COVID levels. Obviously, there might be a lot of things that just permanently shift online because they found kind of dry lab stuff to be easier online. So I think specifically that would relate to your lab, your professor. But I think the base assumption running right now is that things would kind of return to how they were pre-pandemic. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I guess it would also depend on what kind of work you're doing too, like Sheil said, like dry lab stuff, or if you're just conducting like a literature survey, that can all be done online. So you would probably end up being online anyway, I guess, but yeah.
And yeah, like sorry, you go first.
Okay. During your interview with the professor, it's definitely a good idea to talk about what kind of work they're envisioning for you and like the format of your research.
Yeah, and so for example, I know upper years who before COVID happened, even if they were doing something that didn't need to be in person, they would essentially have an office that they would go into and work like during the days and such. That did not happen like last summer. Like last summer, it's like if you could work from home, you worked from home essentially, but then you would go in and do the stuff in person that you needed to go and do in person. So I don't think no one really knows what next summer and future years are gonna look like. But yeah, definitely, as Jane said, mention it in the interview and ask kind of what they're looking for, because there could be professors who it's easier for them to just not have to think about as many people coming in. So yeah.
It was a good question, by the way. All good questions. I think if we don't have any other questions, we'll probably leave for like 10, 15 more seconds, frantically typing any questions you guys do have. If not, the recording of this will probably be up. I'd encourage you to check out the MacSER Instagram page, MacSER YouTube page for more resources. And as Sarah mentioned, the November Research Fair. But aside from that, thank you guys for coming out. Hopefully you guys learned something. And yeah, have a nice rest of your night.
Great. Yeah, I think
Thanks, everyone.
that's good. You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, thank you